Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So just before I get into what I wanted to talk about with this video, just a quick update. So as those of you who have been following my channel will know, the main reason why I've been so inactive on this channel and the reason why I haven't gotten around to finishing the projects that I announced earlier in the year is because I just haven't had the time. I know some of you have been asking about retrospectives and whatnot, and catching up with lives and all that good stuff. I just haven't had the time. I've been working two jobs, been doing all sorts of other stuff as well, and I've just been very, very busy. But just a quick update in that regard. I recently quit one of my jobs. I was talking about that on my other channel, and yeah, I recently quit my day job, and I'm gonna be going into security full time. So in the meantime, I'm just gonna be basically doing what I've been doing part-time, so I'm going to have a lot more time on my hands, and over the next few weeks or so, while I figure all that stuff out, I'm going to have plenty of time to dedicate to YouTube, so I'm going to be catching up on some projects, plan to have some retrospectives and stuff like that finished, as well as a few more live streams. I plan to at least have one live stream per week, for the foreseeable anyway, so yeah, this video here, just wanted to talk about something that, for whatever reason, has been on my mind over the past few days, and that is the Cruiserweight division. So as long-time subscribers of mine will know, I was always a massive fan of the Cruiserweight division. In fact, it was probably my personal favourite division when I was growing up watching boxing. The Cruiserweight division for me was always the most consistent in terms of entertainment value and in terms of overall quality. Like, whenever there was a title fight or a fight of consequence that took place at Cruiserweight, it was almost always entertaining and memorable. There was just something about that division where it just seemed to always have that it factor. And there were so many fighters in that division over the years that I felt were some of the most underrated fighters in the sport. And you had guys who were just guaranteed quality, guys like Thomas Adamek, Denis Lebedev, Krzysztof Wlodarczyk, Marco Huck, all these guys, they were just badasses. They were always in great fights. Even the UK domestic scene, you had guys like Enzo Macronelli, for example, always in a banger. You had David Haye for a very brief time. You had so many fighters in that division who were just guaranteed action and guaranteed excitement. And yeah, always loved the Cruiserweight division. So it's really, really sad to see in recent years, I'd say in the past 2 or 3 years or so, how much that division has plummeted. And at this point in time, in 2025, the Cruiserweight division is basically dead. Like, it is probably the worst division in boxing right now. So it's gone from being one of the strongest to being one of the weakest. So to just kind of sum up how bad the Cruiserweight division is right now and how basically worthless and inconsequential it is, you have guys like Jean Pascal and Badou Jack, guys who were kind of B and C tier title holders back in the day at lower weight divisions, fighting for titles at Cruiserweight, and I mean legitimate world titles. You have Jean Pascal coming up pretty soon. He's going to be fighting for, I believe it's the WBC title, against Michael Ceslac. So you have a 41-year-old former light heavyweight title holder who wasn't even that good back in his light heavyweight days. He was kind of a paper champion, right, who could never really hang with the top guys in the division. And he's going to be fighting a guy in Ceslac who's basically a no-hoper, right? A guy whose limitations have been well and truly exposed, and a guy whose claim to fame is getting robbed against an old man, essentially, So it's a very, very poor title fight, a relatively inconsequential title fight, and it's one that just sums up how bad the division is. And it's a real shame because, for me, what happened to the Cruiserweight division and why it's in the state it's in, and I guess this was inevitable in retrospect, so a few years back in like 2016, 2017, you had a string of undefeated world-class fighters who were absolute monster punchers, great athletes, very, very strong, very fundamentally sound, very exciting, very game and determined, all tough guys. And these were guys like, for example, Myris Briedis, Murat Gassiev, and Alexander Usyk and guys of that level, right? Uniel Dorticos. These were all the top cruiserweights at the time. And you still had some veterans who were still at world level, guys like Krzysztof Wlodarczyk and Steve Cunningham and Marco Huck and guys like that. You know, you had some powerhouses like Kudryashov. There was just so many fighters in that division who were more than capable of upsetting the apple cart just based on the attributes that they had. And it made absolutely every single fight in that division worth watching. And then when they had that World Boxing Super Series tournament, which in my personal opinion, the Cruiserweight one, that was the greatest tournament in the history of boxing. I recently just rewatched it and had a blast rewatching it. And yeah, of course, that was where Alexander Usyk announced himself on the world stage. You know, he went in there, took on all the top cruiserweights, you know, back-to-back, undefeated, world-class guys, consolidated all the belts, unified them for the first time in the history of the cruiserweight division, became undisputed lineal champion, cleaned out the division. You know, he basically announced himself with that. And then, of course, moved on to bigger and better things. You know the story. But what happened in the aftermath of that was that basically the cruiserweight division went a little bit stale. It was kind of like what happened to the middleweight division when Bernard Hopkins became undisputed. The middleweight division kind of fell off a cliff, and there just wasn't a whole lot of quality. That was kind of what happened with Usyk, because guys like Briedis and Glavatsky and Wlodarczyk and Hook and guys like that, you know, Gassiev, they all kind of fizzled out into irrelevance. A lot of them just kind of disappeared and went part-time boxer mode. Some of them, like Gassiev, just completely vanished. That guy's done nothing of consequence since that fight with Usyk. Briedis kind of dropped off significantly, became a bit of a joke, was calling out Jake Paul and whatnot, and then ultimately ended up losing. You know, guys like Dorticos, they've not been the same since that knockout. You know, I think some of the other guys are retired, guys like Marco Huck and whatnot. But yeah, basically that division, a lot of the old guard, a lot of these real tough guys from the previous era, you know, from my generation, they're not there anymore, or they're way past their prime. And you've got guys inhabiting that division who just aren't on that level. And in my opinion, who just, you know, don't really bring much to the table in terms of excitement, entertainment value. You know, and again, guys like Badou Jack and Jean Pascal, who are like B and C tier title holders in the light heavyweight and super middleweight division, they weren't even like the top 5 guys in the division in their day, in their prime. Yet in their 40s, they're fighting for titles at cruiserweight. It really tells you the whole story, doesn't it? And, you know, the top contenders in the division are guys like Chris Billum-Smith and whatnot. It's just not that great a division right now. So, yeah, the days of even a strong domestic scene at cruiserweight aren't really there. You know, we used to have guys like Enzo Macronelli and David Hay very briefly. You know, there was so many great guys there. And I think the main reason why it didn't get much shine back then, and even with it gaining a little bit of popularity because of the World Boxing Super Series, the reason it still didn't gain a lot of shine is because the dominant guys in the division were Europeans. You know, it's a division that has been historically dominated by Europeans, so it was never going to get the kind of shine or the kind of promotion that, say, the welterweight or the middleweight division gets. So yeah, that was always a real shame, and it's a real shame to see how far the division has fallen off. And if you look at the guys who are ruling the roost at that division right now, the top guys, you know, I've already mentioned some of the, you know, washed up old super middleweights and light heavyweights who are going to be fighting for titles. But if you look at the elite of that division right now, you have guys like Jai Opetaia, who is a very talented fighter, don't get me wrong, but he's one of the worst cherry pickers in boxing right now, maybe even the worst, like scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as his level of competition goes. Like, it's really, really bad. And as some of you know, I've actually had a few run-ins with some of his fanboys. Like, Jai Opetaia has this very, very strange, like, set of noob boxing fans who don't seem to understand how the sport works. And when you point out how his last fight was some of the worst, most cynical matchmaking I've ever seen, these guys get very, very triggered and offended by it. I mean, That last opponent that he fought, I forget the guy's name, what was it, Claudio Squall or something like that, whatever his name is, some Italian guy. That guy, I went into the bookies shortly before that fight, right? Because I was looking up the odds for it. That guy was 100-1 underdog. So Jai Opetaia was 100-1 favourite for that fight. And it was a championship. It was a world title fight. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And what it looks like happened with Jai Opetaia, and what's been happening for a while with him, is he's been specifically seeking out the lowest ranked opposition he could possibly fight. Like, that guy had an undefeated record. He was something like 16-0 against absolute nobodies, right? So it seems to me like it was very cynical matchmaking. Jai Opetaia and his team specifically sought out the lowest ranked undefeated guy that they could fight. So essentially they could say, we fought an undefeated opponent. You know, that was essentially what they were doing there, in my opinion. And it's quite shocking as far as I'm concerned. Pure cynical matchmaking. And I don't appreciate it. I don't like it one bit. So when I point it out, and then I get fanboys in the comments saying, oh, but he fought Briedis. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, it makes me chuckle when I read these comments, because I'm like, okay, so imagine if boxing was like that. Like, it's like, imagine if Muhammad Ali, when he beat Sonny Liston, he beats Sonny Liston, then he just goes, done. Just wipes his hands, done. That's it. I can spend the rest of my career fighting bums. And then if you point out how he's fighting bums, he'll just, oh, hang on a second. He fought Sonny Liston 5 years ago, so how dare you criticise him and say he's not fighting anybody? like, could you imagine if boxing was like that? You have one fight of consequence, one significant fight, and then the rest of your career you just cherry pick bums, and people defend you for cherry picking bums because you had that one fight. That's literally what I'm coming across with Jai Opetaia's fanboys at the moment. It's actually quite funny, if truth be told. But yeah, where was I? Jai Opetaia, one of the worst cherry pickers in boxing right now, fighting a Deontay Wilder level of competition. And the other guy who rules the roost in that division, you know, definitely either one or two, is Gilberto Ramirez, who's a fighter I do rate very highly. That's an interesting fight if it gets made. We've been waiting for that fight for like the past 2 years or so. We've been talking about it, and it's one of them fights where I feel like, why waste any time? Like, what is the point? Like, Gilberto Ramirez is fighting Dorticos, and look, that's not a terrible fight, I guess, but Dorticos, like I mentioned earlier, I believe, Dorticos is shot at this point. He's not been the same ever since the brutal knockout loss he had to Gassiev. He's just not been able to get back to that level. So that's another fight that I kind of feel like, again, it's not a terrible fight, but it's kind of inconsequential. I mean, Dorticos got completely schooled when he fought Briedis, who was himself faded at that point. So I just feel like that's a bit of a mismatch. I think Gilberto Ramirez will handily beat Dorticos. He'll probably school him and win on points, I think. And it's not going to tell us a whole lot about who is better between him and Jai Opetaia right now. So I feel like that's just a fight that needs to happen sooner rather than later. Like, there's no point dragging that one out. They're just dragging it out, man. Just get the fight on. Let's see who's better. Let's shut up one side of fanboys. You know, because Jai Opetaia fanboys, they are... I feel like these guys are in for a rude awakening because, yeah, Jai Opetaia is very good. He's a very, very talented fighter. You know, big guy, southpaw, big puncher, fast. Seems to be fundamentally sound. Seems to be very intelligent in the ring. He's got good skills. But I feel like he's not really developing because he's just been fighting bums and guys who aren't really there to challenge him. You know, guys who are cannon fodder. They're there to be an easy knockover opponent for him. So I feel like he's still got a lot to prove. And I feel like if he fights Gilberto Ramirez, a guy who is a lot more experienced, a lot more battle-hardened, a guy who's been 12 rounds many times and has been 12 rounds with world-class competition, and who, you know, you could argue that he has fought better competition even at Cruiserweight. You know, I mean, yeah, Briedis, himself was a very good win, but I would argue that wins over Goulamarian and Chris Billum-Smith, who were two guys who were pretty much at their prime, that's and consolidating some belts, I would argue that that's a little bit better resume at cruiserweight than what Opetaia has right now. And Ramirez, of course, is a two-weight world champion. He was a champion at super middleweight, and he was also a decent fringe contender at light heavyweight. So I feel like that's an interesting fight. Right now, at this point in time, I'm slightly favouring Opetaia, and the reason why is because I think he's bigger, more powerful, more explosive, more talented in general, more naturally gifted, and maybe tougher. Probably a lot tougher, actually. But Gilberto Ramirez, I think, is technically better. I think he's the more skilled fighter of the two, and he's definitely the more experienced. So it's a very interesting fight. Both guys are southpaws. Both guys are, in my opinion, very, very good. And right now, them two fighting each other, putting them in together to fight each other, that could save the cruiserweight division. And that's a fight that I think could be really interesting. As far as some of the other fights going on in that division, the Jean Pascal Michael Ceslac fight, ironically enough, I know I kind of trashed that fight, but it is actually quite an interesting one, and I've got a feeling there's going to be an upset in that fight, because I believe Ceslac is the 3-1 favourite for that fight, but I've got a feeling, and I could be wrong about this, I've got a feeling that in that fight we may see a controversial win for Jean Pascal. And the reason why I say that is because the fight is in Canada, and in Canada, Jean Pascal seems to have a lot of protection politically. Not only that, but Jean Pascal has a history of swindling his way out of fights with a controversial result. Like, basically how his fights tend to go, and this is pretty much the same of any fight of consequence on Jean Pascal's record. He goes out there, and he's one of these ambush fighters, right? One of these explosive, like, fast starters. And he looks great for a few rounds. Like, he goes out there and he throws some fast, sharp bursts of punches. But then he gasses after about 4 rounds. He's basically a 4-round fighter. And after he gasses, he gets his ass beat. And he either loses or gets a gift decision. Like, all his fights are like that. Like, if you look at his first title fight when he fought Carl Froch, he dominated like the first 5 rounds of that fight. Then he absolutely gassed after 5 rounds, and Froch just outworked him, and for me swept the last 7 and won the fight close but clearly on points. When he fought Bernard Hopkins in the first fight, it was similar. He looked great in the first few rounds. He actually dropped him, came out really strong, gassed after 4 rounds, and then got completely schooled and dominated for the rest of the fight. When he fought Kovalev, he got completely smashed again in both of those fights. I actually thought he lost when he fought Lucien Boutte. I thought he got a gift there. He got a few gift decisions, actually. He got a gift decision against Fan Long Meng, a gift decision against Gonzalez. I think there was a couple other guys he got gift decisions against as well. The Uneski Gonzalez one was probably the worst. At cruiserweight, he hasn't really done anything, but I've got a feeling that Ceslac, who's kind of a little bit of a limited guy, in my opinion, doesn't have great stamina, is a little bit predictable. I've got a feeling that Ceslac will go out there, probably arguably do enough to win, but might not get the decision. I feel like Pascal might old man his way through that one. Because another thing with Pascal is what tends to happen with his fights is if he's losing and losing badly, he'll like headbutt the guy or he'll cause like some accidental looking foul, and then the fight will get stopped and made into a draw or a technical decision. Like that was what happened when he fought Chad Dawson. Again, he got off to a great start. He was winning the early rounds, and then he gassed badly. Chad Dawson started to beat his ass and was like on the verge of stopping him. And then basically Pascal headbutted him. The fight got stopped and he won technical decision. But if that didn't happen, I'm fairly confident he would have lost the fight, probably by stoppage, because he had nothing left. He was getting walked down and he was on the verge of being stopped. So yeah, I've got a feeling that's going to be an upset. I think it's going to be a technical or split decision or something for Pascal. I could be wrong there though. But yes, it's an interesting fight in that regard. But yeah, man, that's pretty much all I got to say about the cruiserweight division. It's a shame. I wanted to talk about it because it's been on my mind lately. It's a really, really barren division right now. And, you know, when we're talking about guys like Pascal fighting for the title, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it? It's kind of depressing. But I really want to see that Opetaia versus Gilberto Ramirez fight, because I think that's a fantastic fight if it can get made. And that's one of the few fights that could potentially get made this year that I'm very, very intrigued by. So yeah, let me know what you guys think anyway. Stay tuned for more videos. God bless.